give me control or something. I'm not sure if I can just do it.
I'm starting the recording.
All right. Hey, Doug, can you just let us know you can hear us and we can hear you?
Am I muted or not?
You are live now. We can hear you. We just can't see you. So you're good.
All right.
We prefer it that way, Doug.
I might let you see me later.
No, thank you. All right. Let me know, Deirdre, when I can start.
It's recording, Pete.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is the 30 September 2020 Finance Committee meeting. Jody Garzon is absent tonight. She asked me to take the helm and just kind of lead our discussion. So we're going to get started. I'm Pete Berube. I'm the vice chair of the Finance Committee. Instead of doing intros, I'll just let everybody know who's on the line for our quorum. It's Kathy McGinnis and Craig Schultz, Sean Power, and Doug Riley. So we have a agenda posted. First up on the agenda is the Capital Planning Committee draft report we're going to discuss in preparation for the fall town meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the chair of the Capital Planning Committee, John Barry.
All right, thanks, Pete. And I'm going to try to share my screen here. I think you need to just give me access to that or to do that. I think if you click next to my name, you can make me like a co-presenter or something like that. While Pete's doing that, maybe just a quick introduction. So as Pete said, I'm John Barry, the chair of the Capital Planning Committee, and our committee has been around for about 3 years now, a little bit more than 3 years. So we're starting to finally figure out what we're doing in terms of getting all the town's capital sorted out. And what we're going to go through tonight is a memo or a draft memo anyways, that we put together. It's not quite final. But to give you folks an idea of where we stand with the prioritization process for the various capital items that have been requested. Oh, there it is right there. Perfect. So just a little background on how we've gone about doing this. So we've been working very closely with Mike Kaczynski and Carol Johnson, who have been collecting various capital requests over the last couple of months from different departments around town. We already have an existing rather lengthy list of capital requests that have been collected over the last couple of years. For the most part, the items requested this time around are items we already had on our list, which is good. That's what we want to be, where we're seeing things that we already know are kind of coming up. So I think this actually, interestingly, is probably one of the first times where it really seems like it's starting to work, that the requests coming in are kind of matching up to our schedule, by and large. So that's a good sign for us. So I'm just going to walk you through the report quickly. The key is going to be the second page, but just to give you some sense of what we've looked at. As of right now, there are 21, you can just hang right there, Deirdre. So there are 21 capital projects that are been requested for this fiscal year. We've looked through them all. There are 10 of them, so just under half, that we have given pretty thorough consideration to. And we go through a pretty formal prioritization process to try to determine which are higher priorities and whatnot. The total projects that are on the list for this time around are just about $1.35 million worth, and just under $500,000 we're going to be considering here as part of this discussion. There's $860,000 that these 11 projects, we're recommending these projects be deferred because they are just lower priorities. And we also have some sense of funds available. And so just knowing that, we're recommending to defer a number of projects for the time being. Down a little bit lower, we've got a breakdown of the highest, medium, and lower priorities. And as we say lower, they're not really low S. In just a quick, reminder, these are all important projects. So even the last one on our list is an important project for sure. There are lots of needs of the town. So we don't want to imply that something is not important just because it's getting a lower priority ranking. We know that even small things can really make a big difference to some of the departments. So we are very sensitive to that. So our highest priorities, and we'll get into the specifics of these in a minute. There's 6 of them, totaling just under $420,000. The medium ones, we've got 2, about $59,000. 2 lower priorities at about $15,000, and again, those deferred ones, $860. We'll get into the specifics in just a minute. I will note, you've all seen back in the spring, we did create a larger report. Well, I shouldn't say larger. It's just a more thorough report that shows the capital needs stretched out over the next 10 years for the town. We are in the process of updating that. We won't be issuing an update to that just yet, in particular because there are a couple of fairly significant capital items that are sort of in the works, and we're trying to get better get better estimates for those items. Specifically, those are repairs to the middle high school. Those have been on our list for a while. The school needs some new roofing, it needs some new HVAC equipment. So the school committee's just now getting in a pretty thorough report which details what that could look like, but it's still kind of early stages. We haven't had the chance to have a good discussion with them and figure out what makes sense to put on the capital plan. And the other one is senior center. This has been going on for a few months, where there's been a study around what to do in terms of upgrading the facilities for seniors in the town, whether that's renovating the existing space within the Veterans Memorial Building or creating a new space, a new building. So these are 2 really significant items. We want to make sure that our next version of the longer term capital planning report reflect at least some reasonable estimate of what those are, and we're just not quite ready to do that yet. Okay, so why don't we get into the details? So if you could go down just a little further, Deirdre, there's a kind of table on the next page. Yeah, there we go. So the top, we've got 6 projects at the top there. Those are the highest priorities. 2 of them are DPW items, 2 fire items, 1 police item, 1 school item. So for the DPW, we've got a request for a new dump truck. The existing dump truck is quite old. I know Jim is on the phone, so he could probably answer questions to the extent there are any. But we've got a very old dump truck that is in pretty bad shape, and this new dump truck would replace that. That's used for plowing and a number of other, town maintenance projects. And also the DPW needs it's kind of a mandated assessment of inflow and infiltration, which makes sure that water going into the ground is coming out in the right places. So that is something we have a long-term plan about how we assess that. And so this is just sort of another step in that process there, the 105,000 you see. For fire, 2 items, breathing apparatus and turnout gear. Again, these are 2 items we've known about for quite some time. The chief's done a great job of kind of laying out his capital needs for the next several years. So these ones we've known about, and we agree those are obviously very high priorities for firemen safety. A new police cruiser is another item we are putting as the highest priority. This was actually requested back in the spring. We did defer it back in the spring, but we do think that it's risen to the higher end of the list now. This would actually replace 2 existing cars, so it's sort of a 2-for-1 deal, which is good. That's 53,000. And then finally, the last one on that highest priority list is for the school, some HVAC repairs and modifications. This is related to improving airflow and ventilation in the school in advance of hopefully students going back to the school in the not too distant future, and making sure that the air quality is as good as it can possibly be and everybody can be safe there. So we had a call last night with the school committee to talk about that a bit more. And they gave us some details there. That 99,000 is a placeholder for the moment. Based on our conversation last night, I think likely that number will come down because they're still sorting out exactly what needs to be done. But I think their current assessment is it's a little bit lower than what they initially thought. Let me pause there on those highest priorities and just see if there's any questions. And as you'll see, we are recommending that all of these be appropriated. And I suppose before I get to the questions, which I just prompted, in terms of funding sources, there's sort of a mix here. So the DPW items, can be paid for through enterprise funds. The school item, they're pretty confident that that could be covered with a CARES Act grant related to, the government act that came out a few months back related to COVID-19 type issues. The fire department and the police department, those would be general fund items, both of those. But when I pause there and see if there's questions on the higher priorities, or Pete, please feel free to add in anything I may have missed there.
Yeah, John and everybody attending, I'm also on that committee. So John, first off, has done the yeoman's amount of work. He is the guy that has placed all this together and is honchoed the meetings, and so he's done the bulk of the work, and everybody else, owes John a big thanks. But one thing I would add is that that I think it warrants saying regularly is that those two significant projects that John talked about, he said are significant. They're in the millions of dollars, and likely when they do come down for further consideration, everybody needs to realize that those are millions of dollars and likely a lending, a vote. So I just wanted to make sure everybody acknowledges that, the exact dollar figures aren't known and the timing isn't known either, but we're not talking, a free cash expenditure, not even close.
Okay.
Chair Pete, it's Kathy McInnes.
Yep, go ahead, Kathy.
John, regarding the two DPW items, you mentioned the enterprise funds. Will any funds be coming from the general fund?
Jim's on the phones, or Mike could probably clarify that. So I'm pretty sure, I don't have my notes right in front of me, but I'm pretty sure for the dump truck and the infiltration inflow, those are all enterprise funds. You'll see the next bucket down, there's a medium priority. It says water enterprise. That should probably just say DPW more generally. I believe, oh no, I take it back. I'm sorry, the DPW, 1/4 of that is paid from general funds. I misspoke. So 1/4 of that is general funds, 3/4 of it is enterprise funds. The pickup truck below is all enterprise funds.
Okay.
So Kathy, that'd be roughly 26,000 or something like that would be general funds on that, the dump truck.
I'd just like to continue to go on record that I'm opposed to this quarter. I don't believe that the general fund is absorbing as much as it should when the general fund is paying as much as the enterprise fund would be paying. Less staff on the stormwater enterprise especially. I just get the feeling for everyone that the water and sewer funds are just being used to take without the need of having to go through town meeting to get the funds approved. So I'll continue to be mentioning this fact throughout the finance portion of the meetings. Thank you.
Other questions or comments on the those we went through? Okay.
I'm gonna mention something real quick, John, but you please defer to talk about it later if necessary, or you can defer to somebody else. But there were a couple of items that came up in our discussions that we decided not to consider. We didn't defer it, we didn't consider it, and they were non-capital items. One is the like a labor manpower study. Or salary study.
It's a salary study, yeah.
Yep. And the other one is tree maintenance. That just not that we're in favor of it or not, but it's to us, we felt it was not in the purview of the capital planning committee. So funds, again, we're kind of funds agnostic, or source of funds agnostic in the CPC. And but we definitely want to look at capital items, and those didn't make the cut.
Yeah,
Yep.
And that's not to say those can't be considered for free cash use or something else later.
That's right.
Absolutely, right.
And
Yeah.
I say it because when we look at what's available for free cash, there are items that are not on the CPC list that should be considered. So I just want us to remember that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Pete. And we did debate it. It was not slam dunk that neither of those was capital items. We did come to the conclusion that per our opinion, they were not capital items, so they would be dealt with through budgets, basically. Okay, Deirdre, could you put the thing back up? There's just a couple more things I wanted to touch on there. Great, thank you. So a few other things I'll just point out here. So medium priorities. I mentioned the pickup truck for the DPW. Another one is a fire hose replacement for the fire department, obviously. That is $15,000. This, based on our understanding of the available free cash at the end of the day, which we realize there, as Pete mentioned, there's things that aren't on our list that free cash would potentially need to be used for. The fire hose replacement is sort of right on the cusp. Based on our understanding, we think that all those items where we say recommend for appropriation could be covered by the existing free cash, although the fire hose is sort of right on the borderline. So we're recommending it for appropriation. We think it's an important item. It's got a high score in our ranking process. However, if one thing had to come off the list and be deferred, it would be that one. And again, not to say it's not important, it's extremely important, but the other items we just thought were a slightly higher priority given the age of the equipment and all that sort of thing. So I just want to point that out. So, but our recommendation at this point is to appropriate it to the extent the funds are available, but with the understanding that there's some potential that all those funds may not be available. Just quickly, I'll point out a few other things. Lower priorities. There's a couple of fairly low dollar items. The flooring for the Council on Aging room, for one of the rooms they use in the Veterans Building, and then also a filing system, updated filing system, filing cabinets and storage and that sort of thing for the building department. Both of those groups have indicated these are, really needed items, and we absolutely agree these are needed items and important things to get. But they just came in with a little bit lower priority than a number of the items above. So again, important items. If we had a windfall and additional dollars were available, we may have a different recommendation, but given what we know about funding sources at present, we're recommending those be deferred. And then the last bucket down there at the bottom, there's quite a few items that these for the most part were items that were considered in the spring as potential capital requests. And all of the departments here, so which are the stormwater, the school, and the town, mostly these are school items, had indicated, while these are still capital requests and still important things that they would like to have, they are not at the highest priority at present. So we've recommended to defer those. And again, all these deferrals just will go into the next period, and we'll consider them again in our next go around when we start thinking about the spring town meeting. So why don't I pause there, and happy to take any questions.
Doug Riley has a question.
I do. I'm just curious, the police cruiser, is that, I'm assuming that the fire turnout gear and the scuba stuff, that's part of the regular sort of ongoing replacement program?
Yes.
Is the police cruiser, or I should say cruisers, is that also part of that leasing program that we decided to implement a couple years ago? Or is that something new or separate from that?
I don't know what was put in a couple of years ago, but I will say the chief has laid out a pretty well thought out schedule of car replacements that he provided us with a couple of years ago, and he's been sort of following that schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So and this kind of falls in line with the original schedule he gave us. So again, I'm not familiar with what was sort of agreed to 2 years ago, but from the capital planning perspective, committee's perspective, this has been sort of a planned for item and is kind of coming in on cue. If anything, it's maybe 6 months behind, because I think in a perfect world, the chief would have liked to have it 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think we did defer that.
Yeah.
And Craig, do you remember, was that,
We may
trade
have,
that, did we trade that off for personnel?
I don't recall on that, but it'll probably be, I mean, they're recommending what to acquire, and we'll decide on the sources of where the funds come from. That's the way the roles work. So it'll probably be a lease on the police cruiser, because that's typically what we have done in the past. We have lease payments on the other ones. So
I'm sorry, Craig, sorry to interrupt. This would be leased. The chief had provided us with a lease schedule, so it's like a third of it per 3-year payment. You know.
So it won't be the full 53, but it'll be a third of that, and then we'll also have the previous 2 years of leases. We'll have to make those payments as well.
Right.
And so it'll work out to, if it was one card, work out to close to 53 a year is what it works out, but because of the lease. But I go back to, I think that's probably where it's at place. I don't remember the cruiser though. Last year we may have, the town meeting was so crazy and different. I don't recall if we deferred it or not, but I know he's been on a schedule. Yeah, I'd like more information, and not tonight, but as we go into it about I'm with Kathy on the split between the 25% to each of the 4 funds. I just think we need to look at, staff use and then how vehicles are used. So if the dump truck is honestly 25% across the board, then that makes sense to split it, 25%. If the pickup truck is 100%, the sheets come if it was water or whatever is listed, then it makes sense to spend it out of the enterprise fund. But not tonight, but as we get into the discussion a little bit more, if we could have a clear breakdown about why these things need to be allocated the way they are, it would be helpful for me.
I have a question maybe for, I missed the start of last meeting and I did read through the minutes, so maybe this is a good question for Kathy. Kathy, when is the Enterprise Committee contemplated to commence?
The selectmen haven't made appointments yet, and I believe that Jim McKay has been almost daily knocking on the door of the select board getting this, because there's some very important items on an agenda regarding the health of the water supply. So that's all I can tell you.
Okay, thank you.
I can add in a little bit on that, Pete.
Please do.
So it's my understanding that the appointments to the Enterprise Committee would either occur most likely either at next week's meeting of the board or on the 19th. So I'd expect that during the month of October that committee will be appointed and put into place so they can get to work.
Thank you.
And if I might ask Kathy McInnes once again about the police cruiser, I'm pretty sure I heard that it would be replacing 2 cruisers. Now, at some point, will the chief be asking for another new cruiser, or has he decided that he can do with one less cruiser in his fleet?
Go
Pete,
ahead, Mike. You can
I was
describe
gonna
it
say,
better than I can.
I'll take a stab at that.
Yeah.
From my discussions with the chief, it's my understanding that the overall fleet would be reduced by 1. So 2 of the older cruisers, and I think one of them is like 16 years old, would be retired, and only one would come. This one would come into service. So the overall fleet would be reduced by 1. So, I mean, obviously there'll be more cruisers coming down the road to be requested, but the overall fleet would be, the plan would be to be reduced by 1.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, any more questions? Or John, do you have anything else you'd like to do? Wrap up or keep going?
No, yeah, I mean, I can just close out. So, thanks everybody for your time. We are going to finalize this memo. I know there are a couple of dollar numbers will probably change just a little bit. I know Mike, for example, sent an update to one of the numbers earlier today. So we may have a few dollar changes. It's extremely unlikely we're going to change the prioritization on anything. In fact, we're not because we're kind of done with that process. So we're going to finalize that memo, get it voted on appropriately in our committee over the next week or so, and then we'll work with the Finance Committee to get that published within your book that goes to the town meeting. So we'll have this thing wrapped up in the next couple of weeks here.
Okay, great. Last call for any questions for John. And none heard. Okay, great. Thanks, John. Appreciate
All right,
your
thanks
joining
everybody.
us.
All right, have a good night.
Thank you. And I just wanted to welcome. There's a few names on there that I don't know. I'm pretty sure I know who some of these people are, but welcome, and I appreciate people joining us. John Larkin, and I know Wayne Klocko is going to speak next, and I see Diane out there. So I'm going to turn it over for next item on the agenda, which is the DPW project update. I'm not sure who's speaking first, if it's going to be Wayne or Jim.
Pete, it'll be me, Wayne Klocko. And I'd like to let you know that, as you just mentioned, John Larkin and Diane Germain and Craig Schultz are also members of the Permanent Building Committee. I see them participating here. Jim McKay is an ex officio member of the Permanent Building Committee, so we're all here to answer any questions that you have. As I understand, the purpose of your request for us to meet is to talk about the increased cost of the project and the Permanent Building Committee's request for a warrant article on the November town meeting warrant for an additional $600,000 in order to proceed with the project. I can break that all down for you. I would start though by letting you know that we made a presentation to the select board on Monday night. You're going to hear the exact same thing that we discussed with them on Monday.
Okay. Wayne, I would just let you know, I'm on the Capital Finance Committee, or excuse me, Capital Planning Committee with John, as previously stated, as Mr. McCaffrey is. He's given us kind of a rundown. So I really just ask that you give an overview to the rest of the Finance Committee, and then I'm sure if they have questions, hopefully you'll entertain those, and that'll be sufficient.
All right. So let me give you the high-level overview, and to the extent that you want to delve deeper into questions, I'm happy to do that. And I think the place to start is the original request back in the spring meeting of 2019, where we estimated the cost of this project at $3.9 million. That estimate was based on an assumption that the committee was hoping to be able to avail itself of, which was to build the staff building. There are two buildings that are part of this project, a staff building and a vehicle service and wash building. The staff building we had hoped to build offsite, have it prefab built as a way to save money by not having it built on site, not having to pay prevailing wage, not incurring the cost of doing that here in Millis. When we got into it, our architect strongly advised us that that was not advisable, because we would not have control over not only the construction of the structure, but we would be buying plumbing, electrical, HVAC systems that we really wouldn't be able to inspect, wouldn't really have any understanding of quality, and we'd be essentially buying problems in the long term. And so we decided not to do that. And when we revised the scope in order to build it on site. It increased the cost for that building by more than 100%. That cost went from roughly a little over $400,000 to almost $1 million. And so by doing that, the committee spent considerable amount of time trying to bring the project back within budget. And we went through 2 value engineering exercises to not only reduce the scope, but then also to self-perform the work with existing DPW staff. And that second part has really been a key here, because the DPW staff can do this work at far less expense than it would cost by hiring a general contractor. And so we reduced the scope and the cost by about $600,000 in doing that. And so the project as originally contemplated, and as how we went out to bid, has 3 phases, where the DPW is doing the initial site work in phase 1. Phase 2 is the contract that we're going to talk about the cost of now. And then phase 3, the DPW would come back and finish all the site work and do some of the finishing work in the staff building after the general contractor would leave. And so with that assumption, we put the project out to bid. Our low bid came in at $550,000 over budget. And there are 2 reasons for that. And I want to talk about both of those. The first is we asked in the bid documents for the contractors to carry a contingency for contaminated soil. We estimated an amount of soil. We asked for unit prices in order to deal with that, so that we would have some assurance in the event that we found contaminated soil, that we would have a handle on how much it would cost. As you know, some of you may recall, we ran into a contaminated soil issue when we constructed the police station. And so we were looking to draw some controls around that possibility if we achieved it. As it turns out, we did perform soil testing, and in a meeting last Friday that Jim McKay and I participated in with our architect and our soils engineer, it was just determined that there is no contamination on the site that was discovered. There is nothing further for us to do in terms of testing or sending materials off site. Everything can be used on site. And the only possibility that we would run into incurring costs in this regard would be if for some reason we put a shovel in the ground and we're digging a trench for a water line or sewer line or electrical line, and we ran into something that smelled bad, that was a local contaminated area, we would be required at that point to investigate. And so the contingency still needs to remain there. It is part of the contract, but based on the testing, which is excellent news, and frankly, it confirms what Jim McKay had been telling us about his experience with the site, that any of the contamination that occurred years ago and had been cleaned up satisfactorily years ago, and that there really were no issues. So this recent testing confirms all that. And so it is unlikely, I can't say with 100% certainty, but it is unlikely that we would incur that $330,000 contingency that the contractor is carrying. So that leaves one other delta in the cost, which is about $220,000. And that is simply a result of the post-corona construction market condition. There's a lot of work on the street. Materials are sky high in terms of cost. And so the prices that we were using for estimating this project, particularly in roofing and concrete, were much higher. And so we are subject to the circumstances of the marketplace, and so that's where the remaining $220,000 in difference between the low bid and our estimate exists. Now I can tell you that when we got this low bid, we ran down 4 distinct possibilities. The first was to proceed with the original scope, which would require a warrant article that would consider an additional $600,000 of funding for the project. There were 2 partial options. One was to construct the staff building and then not construct the service wash building. And then the other option was to do the opposite, which was just to construct that building and not the staff building. And then finally to do nothing. The 2 partial options, we consulted with council. Both of those would require going back to town meeting for approval, would require redesign to some degree, and would require rebidding. All of which would keep that portion of the project within the original $3.9 million cost. However, in the long run, would not complete the project as originally intended and would cost substantially more. The final option that we considered was to do nothing, which was to not construct anything, leave the facility as it is, and not proceed. The issue with doing nothing, though, still requires the town to provide, for health and safety reasons, staff, facility that's safe. Jim McKay has provided proposals for renting trailers to provide that space. Requires a 2-year option, so they'd have to lease. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's not an option. It would require a 2-year lease, and that cost we estimate is about $245,000 to do that. Jim has also estimated the cost to outsource the repair and service work that he's doing in the building. And for that 2 years, that cost, we estimated about $290,000. So altogether, it's over $500,000. 535,000 is numbers I just laid out to you. And so the cost of doing nothing has a cost to it in relation to the overall project. And so I believe the select board is of the opinion that there would be 2 warrant articles on this town meeting warrant. One for the additional funding to proceed with the project as originally intended. And then a second article in the event that that failed for the additional funding for the cost to temporarily relocate the staff and the repair operations. And so at that point, I'll stop, answer any questions that you have, ask any of the other members of the Permanent Building Committee if I've missed something, and answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. I'm going to lead off. Could you or could somebody from the PBC comment on the nature of, further in depth on the nature of the work that's going to be performed by DPW personnel?
I think Jim McKay's probably better suited to answer that, but it is generally, it's mostly site work.
That is correct. Wayne is correct. Most of the site work is already ready through phase one. It has been completed. We have stopped, especially now, not knowing what's going to happen in November. So we've ordered the hay bales, the silt socks, and all that, ready to put that down. But we'll wait till after the November meeting to see where we go with that. That would be phase one. We've already cleared, I'd say, 85% of the site. We've met with the Conservation Commission several times and gone through, how they want the area protected, because we are very close to wetlands on both sides of it. And we're almost ready to turn it right over to the contractor once we get up the silt socks and the hay bales and everything else. And then we'll take over after they're done with the three structures, and we will, all they have to do is grade it, and then we'll take it over for curbings, plantings, and then we will eventually have it paved. We'd probably put that under next year's paving contract. We'd put it out through the selectmen, and we'd put a larger bid out, and we would make that as part of it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Hopefully you'll field one follow-up, and that's, what's the risk of having DPW perform this work versus stuff that, standard town O&M versus actually doing construction?
So most of the clearing hasn't been much of an issue. During the summer, we had 3 summer help personnel that worked for us. One of them was paid out of this budget, a full-time 40-hour summer help person, and we've been keeping track of up to hourly rates, and we've kept all that. How many hours of staff have been put into this project? And most of we've been trying to make sure that it stayed on the general side of the project. If there was a water issue, we relocated the water main, relocated a fire hydrant, and that was done with water and sewer personnel. So getting into the winter, we're hoping to have, if it's going to be turned over to the developer, we will have the winter to just stay with working on our stuff. Come springtime, if we need again, we would, would come back and ask for a summer help person to make up for that. You would hire probably earlier in the spring to have at least one person to help cut grass and do general maintenance.
Okay, that's all I have. Anybody else, please?
Did we vote at I'm getting confused now on the timing of these meetings, because the spring, we transferred money that was left over from previous appropriations for the DPW.
That's correct.
I think it was around 300,000 or so. Is that roughly the ballpark?
It's about $134,000, I believe, was added to the project at the last town meeting.
Okay. So just summarizing the points that you made, relative to what was appropriated, the 3.9 million for the project, the essentially the scrapping of the prefab and the on-site construction increased the cost by about $600,000, which, working with Jim and the department, you've managed to offset that in various ways.
Correct.
So the extra money right now basically boils down to $220,000 of added cost related to materials and labor because of COVID,
Correct.
plus an extra 330,000 of contamination contingencies, which you don't think you're likely to need.
Correct.
So I recall when the original project was done, there was a fairly significant amount of contingencies in there. I think it was $830,000, which was at the time, I thought was a meaningful percentage of the total. And I remember we had a long conversation about that. And so I'm just trying to get the numbers squared. The 220, this is completely out of our control. I totally get that. This is something that's endemic across the economy. And so I'm just wondering about the 330,000 in additional contamination contingencies. If that's, I mean, do we really need to appropriate that?
You do, and here's the reason why. It was stipulated as part of the contract. Legally, we would not be able to enter into a contract that we could not make good on. So if in the worst case, we did in fact spend all of that money, we wouldn't be able to pay it because we wouldn't have the override vote or the town meeting approval in order to do it. So we don't think we're going to spend it, but because it's part of the contract, we have to be prepared to do that in the event that would ultimately arise.
But that's over and above the original 800,000 in contingencies that was built into the 3.9 million.
Well, so let's talk about the contingency. In the early stage, before anything is, the $3.9 million number was based on a square foot cost for each building. And so until you actually design the building and specify the concrete and the walls and the plumbing and all of the systems and the furnishings and the glazing and all of those pieces, that's all just in a unit square foot price. And so you carry a very high percentage of contingency there to cover all of the unknowns, if you will. Now that we have an actual firm bid for this scope of work, the only contingency that we should be dealing with are change orders. So if the documents are not clear and the contractor doesn't understand that there's an additional cost to do something that they didn't consider, they would bring that up to us. We would have to consider whether or not it was valid, and that's why we would have a change order. Now, in the pricing that we have today, I've included a 3% contingency based on that $3.5 million contract, and that comes up to about a little over $90,000. I believe that's pretty standard for this stage of how a project is defined. It really is 100% defined at this point. So 3% contingency now should be adequate. And considering all of that, if we don't spend the $330,000 contingency, we're likely to come in probably about $100,000 more than what has already been appropriated. And that's the 3.9 plus that $134,000. There's a credit that we're taking for an upgrade on a roof. You're considering whether or not we would have a rubber membrane roof versus a metal roof. That was $80,000. We'll obviously not take that now because we're over budget. So that accrues to our bottom line. So as we sit here today, again, trying to predict the future, we're asking for an additional $600,000 because we're required to. That's just the way the bids were put out and the contract was written. But my expectation is we probably will spend closer to $100,000 more than what's already been appropriated.
Thank you. I know I'm a pain in the ass about this, but I think I do follow you. So essentially the new construction cost of $3.5 million ate up some of the 800,000 of original contingencies. Plus you have the 220 in the extra labor and materials because of the time delay and the Corona effect. And you have to add in some additional contingency, which is where you come up with this. Ultimately, we're looking at 4.1 million of what you expect, but you're basically saying we need about 4.5.
We need, our ask is the the amount that was previously added, the $134,000, roughly, plus the $600,000 that the Permanent Building Committee voted on and requested, would put the total to $4,636,455.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was not including the 134 that we transferred. So.
Quickly, please, if you could, Wayne, or really anybody on the PBC, could you summarize, and I think you just did it, but I'm asking you to redo it. Please summarize how you think the articles will be written or phrased. What is PBC's recommendation, and have you voted? What was the vote? Did PBC vote on those options?
The PBC considered the 4 options that I had previously identified, which is asking for the additional funds to build the project as originally designed and as bid, and that is the result of, or that requires the additional funding of $600,000. Then we had the 2 options of a partial build, 1 building in each of those. Both of those were discarded as for various reasons, including timing and cost and overall cost to the town. And then the 4th was the cost of doing nothing, which was, as I previously advised, would result in a roughly $500,000 to $550,000 additional operating expense in order to outsource the repair operations and the rental of the temporary staff buildings. So we did in fact vote. The vote was to recommend to the select board a request for an additional funding of $600,000 over what had previously been appropriated, and that's the number that I gave you: $4,636,455.
And your vote was unanimous or majority, or?
No, it was unanimous.
Okay. Any more questions? I know I'm going to try to keep us close to on track. Any more questions from anybody?
Yes, one, if I could.
Certainly.
Between what was discussed at the Springtown meeting and now, I don't know if everybody's been made aware of, and forgive me if you are, Wayne, how has it been, the project, the scope of the project has been lessened? I believe there was a staff room for the school bus drivers that's been eliminated, or could you just brief us on quickly on what's not there now that was proposed originally?
We have made changes in the overall construction of the buildings wherever we could. I alluded to the one major one, which was switching from a metal roof to a rubber membrane roof, which is fine, but that's an $80,000 difference right there. We have we reduced the size of the bus driver area somewhat, but the big cost, the big difference there is the self-performing of the work. The DPW is going to perform the site work as originally or has already been mentioned. They're also demolishing the offices and the structures that currently exist in the current building, which will be converted to unheated storage. They're doing some of the outfitting of the furniture and fixtures, the not plumbing, but installation of cabinets and other equipment in the staff building, and so that's where really a lot of the savings comes from.
Thank you.
Okay, last call. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Klockow, and other members, Diane and John and Craig. You're stuck with us, but everybody else, I appreciate you joining us and for the thoughtful input.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on, I'm going to turn it over to Carol for an update on free cash, certified free cash.
Certified free cash. Carol Johnston, Finance Director. So I submitted the balance sheet certification last Tuesday on September 22nd. Worked with the DOR representative, and we were able to get our free cash certified last Thursday morning. The general fund free cash amount for FY as of July 1st, 2020 is $653,839. The enterprise sewer fund retained earnings is $649,999. Water enterprise retained earnings is $880,065, and stormwater retained earnings is $394,907. I had sent off, I'm not sure if each of you were able to receive the notification that I sent to Deirdre. It was late this afternoon. I'm not sure I sent it off to her hoping she could forward it to you. And it included all the backups so you could see the actual free cash calculation for each of the funds.
Okay.
So, any questions on the free cash?
Yeah, how much of the general fund relates to marijuana money, if any?
So of the free cash of that $653,839, of that $194,070.75 is marijuana impact money.
And that's
So it's host community agreement.
okay. And I just out of curiosity, why are the three enterprise funds so high on their retained earnings? If the idea is to spend what I don't know what the current reserve fund balance is, but is this adding to it?
Each enterprise stands on its own. So each fund has that. It's the residual left over year after year. I would assume that you would want to build your retained earnings in the event that you had an unexpected issue happen with any of the enterprise funds. You'd have money to fall back on rather than have to take a loan. But that's up to the water sewer commissioners and to determine. And as you'll see as we go through the town warrant, each of the enterprise funds is having a significant amount of money asked for from their retained earnings this year. One of the items is will be addressed is for the $600,000 DPW building expansion.
I guess my question is, does that 880,000 of water retained earnings, is that cumulative or is that an additional 880 this year?
No, that's full. That's all you
Okay,
have.
that's all there is. Okay,
That's all there is.
that makes sense.
I'm going to ask a quick question. Carol, I think it was last week, but maybe earlier this week on the Capital Planning Committee, you had given us a rundown on the general fund free cash in terms of what was actually available for fall consideration, fall expenditure. Could you provide the committee with those details?
Oh, sure. So for the fall, as I said, we had $653,839,000 of certified free cash for September. Of that, the marijuana impact fees free cash is $194,070. Unpaid bills for FY 2020 is $16,431.66, and our spring must funds are $324,262. That leaves an available free cash amount for the November fall town meeting of $119,073. We have capital items that will be coming up that we'll be discussing, and of the capital items in the car lease, it's $115,477 from the free cash from the general fund, and that would leave a balance available of just under $3,600.
Does that 115 assume the leasing of, I could probably find on my sheet, the leasing of the cruiser or full cash for the cruiser?
No, it's a leasing of the cruiser. It's 1/3 of the cruiser.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Carol. Real quick, just hang on one second. Anybody else have any follow-ups or need any clarification? None heard. Thank you very much, Carol. Over to Mike for a rundown on the potential warrant articles and status, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think hopefully the Finance Committee did receive the draft warrant late today. I emphasize that it is a draft. The Select Board will have it on their agenda on Monday the 5th, October 5th, to finalize and sign the warrant. So what's before you is still a draft. The draft warrant contains 10 articles, some of which you've already gone over this evening. So, but I'll go through all of them briefly, and be happy to try to answer any questions that you have in regards to the draft. The first article is
just a quick question. I'm sorry, Peter. There was a page in here that shows the budget adjustments. Are we going to cover that as part of the warrant discussion, or is that a separate conversation? It was right after the free cash page and right before the warrant started. It shows 157,000 and
Right, that'll be part of
Why don't we cover it now before Carol drops if she has to?
Well, it's part of, it'll be addressed in Article 2, if you want to have Mike continue with Article 1.
Okay, back to you, Mike.
All right, so Article 1 is the unpaid bills. As Carol had already mentioned, we have a total of $17,246.48 in unpaid bills. We have a few more unpaid bills than usual. It's been an unusual year from start to finish. I would certainly anticipate we won't have this many unpaid bills in future years, but total amount isn't that high, but there's certainly a large number of them, and I've listed them in the warrant for the Finance Committee to review.
Mike, sorry to interrupt, but could you just, why are there so many? And it's really just curious. I mean, there is, and we're going to pay them likely, but why are there so many? What's the
I think there
quantity?
were a lot, yeah. No, it's a good question. I think there was unusual circumstances this year. I think between the issues we were dealing with here, as well as a lot of the vendors sending in their bills late. And basically we had a situation where some of the departments had difficulty tracking bills, the purchases, and then following up to make sure the bills came in. And it was just a combination of those factors
Okay, thank you.
that resulted in this. So Article 2 is the big budget article. Just to talk briefly about the funding sources for this article. The total articles for $483,556. $302,616 would be a raise and appropriate. $95,940 would be from the marijuana impact fees. $85,000 from the ambulance revolving fund for all the transfers here. And the largest portion of this is actually resulting from the discussion that the select board had recently about reinstating the reductions that were decided upon at the annual town meeting. And that's reinstating the hours at the VMB and the expenses that were cut at the library, as well as the reduction in the school budget. And that totals up to $257,615.89. And then there are two other issues or items within the general fund budget. The Recreation Committee has requested additional funding for the Recreation Department of $10,000. Obviously, that department has been hit particularly hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. They have continued to hold certain types of programs, but unfortunately, the types of programs that bring in revenue, many of which have not been able to be held this year, has caused issues with their ability to bring in funds. So I imagine the select board will be discussing that at their meeting next week. The other item is $35,000 for a cybersecurity initiative at the request of our acting IT director in conjunction with a cybersecurity project that's going to be done for the enterprise funds as well under separate funding. This is being asked to move forward really for the protection of the town's IT infrastructure. Up until now, we have not had as robust a cybersecurity, and we have improved that dramatically over the last couple of years, but this is a full review of our cybersecurity systems and our status. So, and that will be discussed, I'm sure, in more detail at the select board meeting next week. And then we move on to the funding for certain items under the Marijuana Impact Fund. This was discussed at by the Finance Committee in the spring in relation to the school resource officer, the funding for that, as well as the marijuana stipends within the police union contract. That's a total of $95,940. And then there are requests from the chief and fire chief in relation to the 4 new firefighters as part of the SAFER grant. The SAFER grant covers all the costs of the new firefighters for 3 years, with the exception of overtime and clothing allowances and equipment. So there's a total of $85,000 from the ambulance revolving fund. But we do expect on the other side to have positive results from this as far as the overtime costs in general within the department. So that's the total of Article 2. And I know if Carol wanted to talk a little bit about the questions that came up earlier about funding and so forth.
I'm just got a question about the SAFER grant. I know
Yes.
there was something that was presented to us before we approved the budget, and I didn't think we moved forward with that. Is this a different thing? Is this you said this is 100% for 4 years?
It's 100% for 3 years. So usually there's a local match of I think the first year it's 25%, and then it moves to 50 and then up. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the federal government SAFER grant is now 100% covered by the federal government. And it's really only the overtime costs and the clothing allowance and equipment that needs to be covered.
I mean, not that I'm opposed to this, but I mean, we just commit, if we do this, we've committed to 4 staff at whatever the salary is. In 3 years, we'll be putting
It'd be in 4 years.
in 4 years?
In 4, because the first 3 years are 100% covered by the federal government.
So yeah, after 3 years,
All
we'll
three.
be putting 200, 250, I don't, you know, some large amount is going to hit the budget all at once. And so this grant is something that can be entered into without town meeting vote or anything along those lines? Because I don't recall it being on the warrant, but that was a crazy time.
That's correct. At the conclusion of 3 years, it's up to the community to determine whether or not the community wants to continue with this. Obviously, I think from the federal government standpoint, they'd like the town to, you know, continue to have these individuals, but there's no requirement. There's no lock-in on this, so it's up to the community to determine how to continue with that after the 3 years. So certainly it has to be planned for from 3 years from now, if there's going to be these 4 officers brought on. Some of this will be absorbed through reduction of overtime costs within the department, and some of it will be a planning for the future and through ambulance revolving funds, which we expect to go up and have gone up tremendously this year. And I'm sure the chief will be coming in at some point, probably in January, to talk about that with the finance committee. But and we can certainly have the fire chief come in to the finance committee to talk about the details of this sometime over your next couple of meetings if you'd like to discuss the details of this with him. We'd be happy to ask him to come in to meet with the committee.
Yeah, it makes sense to look at it. With the police, I was hesitant to commit the money till we had the money, and now we're committing several $100,000 in 4 years that we're going to have in our budget someplace. And
But
it's
is
very
that-
hard to cut fire department staff once you've had them. But it's beyond our control. And the finance committee, if the selectmen have decided this is a good idea, I hope they can show approve a funding mechanism in 4 years that makes it still be a good idea. So I'd hate to have to.
I believe it will with the ambulance revolving fund. As the aging population is moving into Millis, we're finding more ambulance runs, therefore more revenue. I don't think in 4 years you're going to have an issue trying to fund these 4 gentlemen.
Well, that's good. All right, then. I just was a little surprised that it showed up here as a funding request for something that I thought that just kind of disappeared from our radar screen. Even though I know
Well, it did disappear, but the federal government came back and said, we're going to give you 100%. So do you not want to go ahead with that, knowing that for 3 years it's 100%, and then in the 4th year, we know based on our revenues we're seeing on the ambulance fund, we should be able to accommodate that.
Okay.
And like I said, we do expect this to have a positive impact as far as our overtime costs in the fire department. And I know that's something that we've been working on, the chief's been working on. I think as far as the operations of the department, the recent history as far as the ambulance revolving fund and the ambulance program, I think the chief would be happy to come in and discuss the details of that and some of the recent experiences with that account, which has had tremendous growth over the past 6 months. And so it's a legitimate point you make as far as, where are we going to be, 3 years from now when we have to talk about how do we roll this into the town budget. I think that's where the ambulance revolving fund comes in, and we need to look at how we manage that moving forward in preparation for that day when the federal funds will no longer be available for funding this.
Yeah, I guess my other question is, if this is supposed to reduce overtime, why is there a $60,000 increase to the overtime budget?
Well, the first year is a transition year, so there's going to be a lot of issues with that the first year. And again, I think the chief is probably best able to talk about the specifics of that. That's why I recommend that you invite him into an upcoming meeting to talk about this transition year, and then how that'll meld into the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think it'd be worthwhile because the 25,000 makes sense. You have to clothe and equip them, but to say we're going to cut overtime and then increase the overtime budget by $60,000 just seems backwards. You know?
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. I think that's going to be more an impact in years 2 and 3. And again, we're having to phase this in over the next several months. So there is some, and we still do have issues in the current year with a couple of members of the department that have been out on paid leave. So that's an issue as well. That's really in some ways unrelated to this, but.
Okay, Mike, if you would press on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Article 3, Mr. Berry did an excellent job of going over this item. Just to point out, there is one error in Article 3. You'll see that the bottom line in the chart and the line within the verbiage at the top are slightly different. So the total here under Article 3 capital is $328,714. And covering these items, which I think the committee went over earlier as well.
Mike,
and then,
if I could interrupt you, did you discuss with Chief Barrett whether or not the fire hose will drop off based on the insurance claim?
I did, and he indicated that it would not.
Yep.
And so in looking at the available funds and speaking with the finance director, we felt we could add this in here. It would fit within the within this list. Understanding that was the last item to come on the list was this item, but we could fit that within that scope. And then on the other capital item was Article 4, which is separated because it's part of a 3-year lease, and this item requires a 2/3 vote, and so it requires the approval of the lease and the first year funding for the vehicle. I believe Article 5, the committee went through at length with Mr. Klockow. Article 6 as well. This is $275,000 for the first year payment of a 2-year lease for temporary office space for the DPW. And this would only be acted upon if Article 5 failed to pass. So we would not be seeking the approval of both articles. Article 7 is an item to review and to hire a consulting firm to conduct a wage and salary study. We have looked at this, and it's been quite a number of years since the different positions at the municipal center, which is made up primarily of members of the SEIU, as well as a few non-union, non-contract staff. It's been a number of years since a review has been done of those positions. The town will be entering into negotiations with the SEIU starting in January for the next contract. And this is there to kind of set this stage up and to be ready for the board to be ready to go into negotiations with the unit to be able to effectively have those negotiations with updated survey information. Article 8 has to do with tree trimming and removal. There has been an ongoing need to do this work. We do have a large number of trees in town, many of which are of concern. I think some of those concerns were expressed by the tree warden at the Springtown meeting. And these funds would be sought in order to address some of those tree trimming and removal issues. Having said that, we are working with Eversource, and they are helping us out with some of that tree work as well. So we are pressing them to help us, and they have been helpful in addressing those tree issues.
Mike, do you know what the results were of the unscheduled tree trimming that occurred last night?
I cannot answer that. I think Mr. McKay will be best to answer that. I don't know if he's still on the line, but
He is on the line.
I don't know if he has any comments on the Nature's Fury tree trimming of last night.
So actually, it wasn't all that bad. We did have a bunch of trees that, limbs that fell. I think there was a couple of trees, but Eversource removed on Main Street. If anybody drives down towards Medfield, they can look up. I mean, there's still a lot still there, but they removed just in the past, I'd say month and a half, 8 to 10 trees there, the big ones that were hanging over 109. They removed a bunch on Dover Road. They're going to complete their task up. I know they're going back up to Orchard Street, and there's a couple on Brookview, and there's a couple that we've asked that, while they have their trucks here, if they would do it. There's a couple on Island Road they're going to take down. That's been an emphasis on ours because the budget, when it was reduced last year at the Springtown meeting, our tree trimming budget is already gone. I mean, there's no money left in that. So they've been doing very well for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Article 9, this is an article that was originally contemplated for the meeting back in June, but the board decided to push this off till now due to the COVID chaos. We're certainly hoping that the town meeting can consider this fall, and this would be to essentially, this changes the date of the spring annual town meeting, so that instead of being held the week after the town election, it's held the week before the town election. With the really thought process behind it is that the select board and the planning board and those boards that may be involved in town meeting have their more experienced members on the board to be able to present information and discuss the different articles and issues of town meeting. It really just changes the date by 2 weeks, makes it 2 weeks earlier. So that's really the push behind Article 9. Article 10 is requested by the planning board, and this is a Millis Center Economic Opportunity Overlay District. And I would recommend that you invite some folks in from the planning board or Mr. Weiss to come in and discuss the merits of this proposal at one of your upcoming meetings.
Deirdre, could you make a note of that?
Already have.
Thank you.
And that concludes the warrant articles, Mr. Chairman.
I have a question. Just
Go ahead, Craig.
looking back on that FY budget adjustments tab in between the free cash and the warrant article on our handout. There's 199,000 balance revenue and expense increase. Is that some funding that we're planning to use on to pay for some of these items, because we only had 119
Yes.
available free cash and 115 of needs on the capital alone?
Yes.
Okay.
So we would plan on using, of that 457,000, we're planning on using 357,615 for, to restore the cuts that were made to restore them as of December 1st. And then in addition to that, we would have the wage and salary would come under that, and tree removal would come under that, as well as there's a couple of, it would be the cybersecurity for 35,000, and also the recreation 10,000, and that would bring it up to the 357.
Okay.
So we'd still have about 100,000 as raise and appropriate that we would feel comfortable with.
Okay. And I was just, my only thought was, and it's tiny, I thought the rec was going to ask for significantly more, to be honest, but that 10,000, there's no way to use the host community agreement money for that if it seems to fall into a category that would be allowed, and we've got extra funds in that.
It's certainly a possibility, and you know, we could discuss in more detail with the recreation committee as to the exact use of those funds
Yeah.
and how those could link back to COVID. They would just need to be able to link those back. I mean, in addition to the 10,000, I mean,
Yeah, not to COVID, to
the
marijuana.
marijuana. And I see that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yes, they could. I'm sorry. Yes, the marijuana, they could link those back, but they just have to be able to make that nexus. So, we could certainly have those discussions with them.
Yeah. I mean, if it was more than that, I'd be more adamant about trying, but it's just a question at this point. And I don't think anything else even comes close to falling under that category for me looking it over. So,
Recreation did request, of the marijuana impact money, they requested a summer drop-in program for ages 12 to 17. They had asked for $20,000, but I don't think that this $10,000. I think it's just to keep them afloat. I don't think it's for this particular program.
Yeah, I was just thinking if they're not kept afloat, then that certainly is a huge impact. And if we have this money to keep them afloat, but again, it's not as much as I thought it was going to be their need, so it's not that much of an issue.
I mean, they did they did indicate they may need to revisit this again in the April-May timeframe to be able to close out the year. So, just to put out there for the board.
I guess my thought has always been that the rec department, just as it exists without even a special program, is just as the police department school resource officer, which is not a new hire or a new program, is also related to marijuana funds in some way. So I just thought it would be a nexus that could be shown if we needed to. For this year only, to get through the situation, I'd have to cut back on the rec this year.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Anybody else? Before we move on to new business, old business, and while we're talking town meeting, Mike, any updates on the date and the venue and anything else fall town meeting?
Yes, I'd be happy to. We've actually had several meetings with a group I put together of, basically a informal town meeting planning group trying to work out.
Is an equal opportunity employer.
Work out the.
Sorry, I was on the website.
Work out the details of the fall town meeting. So, and we've had discussions with the select board in regards to this. So we are looking at a fall town meeting of Saturday, November 7th at noon, to be located in the high school parking lot, immediately outside the gymnasium entrance. We've looked at all the aspects of this for parking, for safety, for restrooms, for power, and it seems to fit all the requirements.
So we're aware of that, and as you describe it, all of that is still on track.
Yes,
okay.
And all that's still on track, and certainly we're, the planning group is going to be meeting again as we get closer, keeping tabs on the weather, which is the biggest question mark for us, and hopefully we'll hope for a little spring sunshine sometime during the first week of November to be able to successfully have that town meeting outside, so we don't have people overly cold out there, which is our biggest concern. But that's still on track, and certainly I can update the committee at each of your upcoming meetings as
Sure,
to
if you would
change to that status.
Okay. I have kind of one last follow-up back on the warrant. In the spring, there was discussion of a sewer hookup warrant article, but it was deferred as being rather controversial for not having what was anticipated to be not a very highly attended meeting. It looks like it's not on there this time. Can you just give us some insight?
Yeah, I think for similar reasons, there were number one, there's been so much going on with dealing with the COVID pandemic and everything else surrounding that, along with many of these other issues that taken that and combined with the fact that this fall town meeting may still be in such a way that's the concern was certain folks may still feel like whether it's a little too cold for them or they're uncomfortable being outside, that such an important and possibly robustly debated article should probably be deferred till the spring, and that's what the select board are looking at this time. And that will also provide the opportunity for our new enterprise fund committee to really dig into this and work on the background in regards to this issue to provide some further advice to the select board.
Okay, great. Thank you. If you didn't know, I'm not trying to be curt or rude. I just want to keep us close to on track, and we're over right now. So any old business, new business that anybody wants to bring up? Hearing none, moving on. Meeting minutes. They're posted with the meeting materials. Can I get a motion?
Move that we approve the minutes as written.
And hearing motion and a second, any further discussion on that? Hearing none, I'll take a vote. We'll do it one by one. Craig?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
Kathy?
Yes, aye.
And I vote yes. So Deirdre, please document and post.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Last call for any other comments and questions. Okay, Deirdre, next meeting?
Is the tri-board meeting is on next Wednesday at 7. It should be a brief meeting for the tri-board, and then I believe the finance committee will then go into their own scheduled meeting, at which time I can invite Chief Barrett and Rich Nichols from the planning board to attend after the tri-board. It's entirely up to you.
Okay, it's actually not entirely up to me. It's entirely up to Jody, and please check with her. I agree with that, and I think you should invite those folks to participate or to attend. But please check in with Jody, and I'll try to reach out to her as well, just to make sure she's tuned in.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I want to thank you all for your attendance, especially Mike and Carol. Thank you very much. And until then, we'll hear from everybody next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Second.
Can I get a second? Thank you. And we are adjourned.
Good job, Pete.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening, everybody.
You too,
You
Carol.
too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.